Chapter 12. Yes! Jane looked up from tying her sneaker. Carter was walking in a small circle now, and he spiked an imaginary football over his shoulder. "What is it?" Jane said. "Over there, see?" They'd been hiking for hours with no luck, and the land around them had started to thin out. As the wall of jungle dropped away behind them, they'd gotten their first look at the island's huge inner lagoon from ground level. Jane had seen the lagoon from above, on Lookout Point, but not the cliffs that faced it on this side. The cliff walls themselves were dotted all over with dozens of black holes, more caves, Jane realized. Some were just small openings, but others were at least as big as the one that they'd found in the woods on the opposite side of the island. "Do you see it?" Carter said. "See what?" Jane said. "Give me your camera." He took it and he zoomed in on the cliff wall, directly across the lagoon from where they were standing. As the image came clear, Jane swallowed hard. Or at least, she tried to. Her throat was sore and as dry as paper. But right there on the camera's view screen was a small waterfall. It spilled out of one of the caves from a height of about 10 feet. The water cascaded over a rock formation into a pool down below, then continued on toward the lagoon. Carter grinned. I told you we'd find it. Come on." Jay didn't need any coaxing. She was exhausted from the hike. The sight of the falls got her moving again. It was too far to swim all the way across the lagoon, so they continued around it in the same clockwise direction that they'd been going. Soon they were at the very narrowest part of the island. The ground was just sand and beach grass here, with several small streams cutting across their path as they went. It was like a chain of tiny sandy islands, one after the other. The first water crossing was easy. They barely slowed down as they splashed right through. But then they came to a much deeper channel. "Keep going," Carter said. "Hold my hand." As they started across, it only took a few steps before the water. It was all the way up to Jane's chin. The current was stronger than she had thought, and her feet left the ground a few times before Carter pulled her back close. By the time they'd reached the next patch of dry sand, both of them were soaked and out of breath. Jane's wet pack felt twice as heavy as before. "I hope that was it," she said. But it wasn't. They'd barely scaled the next dune before Jane realized their luck was running out. What stretched in front of them now was something like a fast-flowing river from the ocean to the lagoon. "I think we have to go back," Jane said. "I don't think we can," Carter told her. For the first time, he looked truly worried. When Jane turned around, she saw why. The last channel that they'd managed to cross was now just as high as the one in front of them. The tide was rushing in and their tiny island was shrinking by the minute. "We're going to have to swim across," Carter said. "It's too fast," she said. Jane was a good swimmer. She'd been doing it all her life, but that was in pools and in Lake Michigan back home. Here there was nothing to stop her from getting carried off like a piece of driftwood. "I'll check it out first," Carter said, "and then I'll come back for you." "No, don't," Jane said. The only thing worse than being stuck here together would be if they were separated. She grabbed for Carter's arm, but it was like trying to stop a bulldozer. He walked straight into the channel, up to his waist, and then he drove away. Carter was shocked at how quickly the current took him. The moment his feet left the ground, he felt himself swept sideways away from the direction he wanted to go. "Carter!" he heard Jane yelling, but there was nothing he could do now. Immediately he knew that he had made a mistake. He turned over in the water, trying to stroke his way back to shore, but it was too late for that. Before he could take another gulp of air, he felt himself tumbled back underwater by the current. His pack wasn't helping either. The straps bound him up as he tried to swim. The more he struggled, the more he felt wrapped like a mummy, unable to move his arms at all. He had to get free of it or he would drown. Carter bucked and jerked with everything that he had, struggling to ditch the pack. His lungs burned desperate for oxygen that wasn't there. What he got instead was a giant gulp of salt water. Finally, with a last desperate twist, he pulled one arm loose and then the other. There was no thought of trying to keep the pack anymore. All his mind could perceive was the need to breathe, and he kicked toward the light of the surface of the water. Just when it seemed as if his lungs were going to pop in his chest, Carter broke through, hacking up water and sucking down air practically at the same time. "Carter!" Jane yelled, somewhere behind him. He spun around in the water toward her voice. That's when he realized just how far from the sandbar they had been carried. Jane was a good 100 yards away. She dropped her pack but was standing in the channel up to her knees now. "Jane!" he croaked out. His throat burned from the salt water. "Stay right there!" She seemed to hear his voice but not what he was saying. Instead of staying put, Jane took another cautious step forward, and that was all it took. Carter saw his sister go down as the water swept her right off her feet. After that, he couldn't see her at all.